Hello, Christopher. How are you? How do we find you? Where do we find you?
I'm in LA, and very nice to be joining you over the phone lines.
I've been lucky enough to see your new film on the IMAX as well at the BFI, and it's extraordinary. It's absolutely brilliant. For such a huge piece of work, there's an incredible intimacy to the film as well, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't know where to start with it. I guess when you're thinking about starting your next project, your next film, what is the thought process? Is it about making a type of film, a theme, an emotion, a story, a character? Is it always the same or is it always different?
It's always different, really. I mean, it's a hard one to answer because I think you try to kickstart your creative process in some ways by deciding on a genre or deciding on the type of film you might want to make next. But usually that doesn't really provide anything direct. Usually that just sort of starts you thinking about the opposite, and you wind up going in a completely different direction. Because as a filmmaker, you don't want to be overly reactive. You don't want to sort of turn around and go, okay, now I've made this, I'll do something completely different, or I'll do something the same. Or so it's really about story, and it's hard to know why a particular story hooks you at a particular time in your life. It's impossible to predict. I mean, I look back at my career, and I don't think I would have predicted any of the different films that I've made at the particular times in my life that I made them.
What was the catalyst for this? What was the thing that made you start thinking or writing the screenplay for Tenet?
I think the original catalyst was the idea of swapping the direction of time. It was the image and the notion of a bullet stuck in a wall being pulled out of the wall and back into a gun. And it's something that I used as an image. I used metaphorically in Memento a long time ago, and that was a metaphor, and the playing with time was structural conceit, the two directions of time in Memento. There's a sense in which Tenet is a sort of attempt to make concrete and make part of the actual story elements that the characters are dealing with that idea of time and the mutability of time.
Time is something that we can tell you have a fascination with over a number of films. Where do you think that comes from? Where does that fascination and interest and intrigue come from?
Well, I like to say I'm fascinated by time because I've always lived in it. And it's a bit glib, but there's real truth to that, though, because we are all obviously living in time and living with time, and it's one of the things that causes us, it's one of the biggest influences on our lives, the biggest influence probably, and yet we're unable to fully understand it, we're unable to really grasp it, or even explain what it is, quite frankly. And that's fascinating to me. It's one of the great enigmas that we all have to deal with every second of our day. And the relationship between that subjective experience of time and the ways in which we experience time changing at different points in our lives, different points in our day, the relationship between that subjective experience and the mechanism of cinema and how shot following shot following shot builds up a narrative experience in the minds of the audience. You sit there in a cinema and you receive a story in roughly 2 hours, but the time span of that story can be minutes to centuries to millennia. It's all possible, and that's a fascinating relationship. And the mechanism whereby that relationship is exploited or takes place, to me, is fascinating. And I like the idea of exposing that mechanism and involving the audience in a, I suppose you'd say, a discussion of that mechanism, just trying to make them experience or notice the way in which a movie is making them feel about time.
Yeah, I think as well. It's that wonderful thing of there's a great line in the film. I think it's Posey's character says, "Don't try and understand it. You've got to feel it." And I've used that line when people have asked me what the film's about. It's like, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to tell you it's brilliant. Don't try and understand. Just feel it. And that's almost, I think, it's it's quite indescribable. And I think that as a filmmaker, you have, whether it's an intention or not, kind of created your own genre of filmmaking. And I hope you take that as a huge compliment because it's an espionage film, it's a spy film, but it's so much more. It's quite hard to pinpoint, which is such a unique thing, I think, in cinema.
Well, thank you. I mean, I do take that as a huge compliment. I use genre to try and play with audience expectations. I don't mean play with in a sort of toying sense, but in a sense of what can a particular genre, or the conventions of a genre, what advantages can they give you with audience expectation. And in dealing with something as abstract and slippery as time and the inversion of time, having the solid structure of the spy film with the expectations that presents to the audience and the familiarity, the familiar elements that gives the audience to hold on to, that lets me try and take the audience places they've never been before. 10 years ago with Inception, we tried to do that using the conventions of the heist film to explore dreams and dreams within dreams and so forth. And I think really this is, for me, is a very similar thing. I'm taking the spy film genre and using it to address ideas of time.
Inception sent me down a kind of lucid dream rabbit hole where I kind of got obsessed with lucid dreaming and was trying to teach myself to dream in a certain way afterwards. That's how in depth I got after my kind of 7th viewing of Inception. It was just like, oh.
Don't start trying to walk backwards down the street with this film.
It's quite fun sometimes. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing is like there's a whole kind of discussion around the kind of technical aspect to this film in terms of how you were able to do that. But I almost kind of feel like I don't want to know in a way, because like you say, you want to be in that room experiencing the feeling, the physical thing that this film does to you whilst you're watching it. Can we talk a little bit about your cast? A fantastic cast, and there's a couple of familiar faces in there that you've worked with, but John David Washington, wow. Can you talk a little bit about casting him and what it was about him as an actor that you'd seen previously that you knew that he was your protagonist and working with him?
Well, I'd first noticed John David on the HBO show Ballers, which is just one of those things where he just struck me with his charisma. And then a couple of years ago, I had the good fortune I was at the Cannes Film Festival with what we were referring to as an unrestored version of 2001 of Kubrick's masterpiece. We took a newly struck print to present at Cannes. And while I was there, Spike Lee got in touch and invited me to the world premiere of Black Klansman. And I went to that screening, which was an extraordinary event and just an electric response to that movie. But for me, seeing John David sort of center that film and carry the audience with him, it was impossible for me to get him out of my head at that point, because I tried to write without actors in mind. But after I'd seen him in that film and seen how, as I say, he carried us with him on that journey, it was very tough for me to not think of him while I was writing after that. And then I met him when I'd finished the script, and creatively, we just clicked. I think he has this warmth and accessibility that's extremely important for the protagonist, because what we're trying to do there is create an iconic presence at the heart of the film, and it's something you can't approach directly. You can't try and find an actor who will just be an icon of, spy movies or whatever. You have to approach it in a different way and look at who the character needs to be. And for us, and John David and I were really on the same page, it was about removing the cynicism that these characters are usually drenched in, because there's a paradox there. If you're looking at a character who will lay down his life for his fellow man or for an ideal or for an abstract principle, which is very often what these characters are saying they're prepared to do, to us it felt that had to encompass a degree of faith in humanity and a warmth and a feeling of empathy towards the people around him. And so balancing that with this sort of get things done, this kind of ruthlessness as far as the task at hand, I think he found a way to reconcile those two very different impulses, and I think it presents a really remarkable aspect to the character.
The car chase as well. Oh wow! I mean, I love a car chase. I think it's between Blues Brothers and maybe Ronin or French Connection for me. But you think back to Inception and the incredible car. There's a few of them actually, I think, in Inception that just. But in this, it's kind of it's jaw dropping. It's but you're right there in the action, and you kind of can feel the car twisting and all this kind of thing going on. You can tell that you love what you do, that you get so much joy out of making films. But with those specific sort of scenes, are they really fun for you to kind of create and choreograph and put together and take us on a journey within that car scene, I guess?
I mean, they are fun. I mean, I've done car chases before, and you try and build on what you've done before, and so there's a certain knowledge that comes with it. But I hadn't done a car chase specifically with Hoyter before, and so he brought a freshness of approach and technical approach for getting that giant IMAX camera, getting it just as he had on Dunkirk. He'd managed to find engineering ways of getting it into the cockpit of a plane. We found ways to just be in the car with the actors, which was phenomenal. I mean, you point to Ronin as a great car chase, which it is, and Frankenheimer as a master. But I would actually point to Live and Die in LA, because I think that Ronin drew a lot from that. And I think that what Friedkin did with that, I don't know if it bettered the French Connection. I know he was trying to. But the way in which the camera just sits with the characters and takes you subjectively through that car chase was something I absolutely had in mind about trying to do that with an IMAX camera. But also, in the case of Tenet, what we're trying to do is we're trying to give the audience a fresh pair of glasses through which to see the car chase. So we're trying to, I mean, in a sense, I would say reinvent it, because it sounds a little too pompous, but it's really about turning it on its head and looking at it in a different way, because car chases are such fun, and the energy that it can be such a ride in the cinema. But, you know, what's your excuse for a car chase these days? You know, having seen so many great ones and so many great movies, for me, the conceptual basis of Tenet, with its ideas of time and playing around with those things, it really gives me another way in which to bring the audience into that experience.
A couple of new collaborators as well in your composer, Ludwig Göransson, and also your editor, Jennifer Lame, who she comes from this wonderful background, be it, Marriage Story or Manchester by the Sea, a lot of the intimacy of those films. You can absolutely feel her experience of that within this film, in terms of both, I think, particularly how intimate you get with John David's character and how you feel, kind of with him in a way. But do you mind talking a little bit about Jennifer and working with her and what it was about her work that you really connected with and thought she could bring to Tenet?
Well, what I connected with in her work is that intimacy you're talking about, that ability, that focus on character and bringing that across. And of course, over the years, I've been working with Lee Smith on larger and larger films. When I started with Lee, he was the big movie guy and I was the small movie guy. And then over time, we both became the big movie guy. And so when Lee wasn't able to do the film and I was looking for a new editor, I sort of thought, okay, well, now I'm the big movie guy, so I know I can do all that stuff if I have to, and I can lend a hand with that. We have the mechanism in place. So what I really want is somebody who's coming at it in a very fresh way, and Jen had exactly that. And she was just coming off Marriage Story. She's a phenomenal editor, and I'd seen her work in Hereditary, Manchester by the Sea. Really, really precise work, really focused. And so she brought a very fresh energy to things that I felt was essential, because you can have all of the mechanics of the thing, you can have all of the large-scale explosions and racing around and fights and all the rest, but if you don't have that connection between the audience and the characters through all of that stuff and through the more intimate moments, that's the really precious stuff. And she was able to bring a really fresh take on that, and did a remarkable job, I think. But yes, I did warn her up front that the third act of this film was going to be as challenging an editing job as I know of.
You must be thrilled that people are going to see this in cinemas. I had my first visit back to the cinema last week at the IMAX, the BFI. It was the most wonderful time that I've had in such a long time. So you must be thrilled that, that people are going to see it where it was intended.
I'm just really thrilled that the studio's chosen to put the film out in places where people have been able to go back to cinemas, because it's a film that's made for the big screen, and it's really exciting to think that people in different parts of the world are now going to be able to experience it. For me, a film isn't done until the audience kind of sends it back to me and tells me what it is I've done. So the fact that this process, although it's clearly going to take a long time, but the fact that it's actually beginning, that is very exciting for me.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's a real treat to get to chat to you about it, and massive congratulations again on the film. It's brilliant.
Well, thank you.